Hey gang, and welcome back to another exciting Clash Royale sneak peek. This one's broken up into two parts. Bandit is the first of the 4 new cards to come out, and there are 3 other cards that are about to come out that I get to show you in little bits of previews here. The other 3 cards, so Bandit is of course the first one. Check out the earlier video to get a much more detailed look at Bandit and the Bandit Draft Challenge gameplay. The other 3 cards are in no particular order: Night Witch, Bats, and Heal Spell. Okay, so this one's a little different of a sneak peek. I'm going to go through each card individually and talk about them, but Supercell has told us that we're not allowed to share any gameplay. I can show you stats, I can talk about it at length as much as I want, but no gameplay. So if you're looking for that, sorry, this isn't the video. This is going to be more me talking about the cards, my experience with them, and just sort of speculating on what we can do with them. Supercell is changing their release pattern, so instead of these cards being released every 2 weeks in a guaranteed order, they've already said these 3 cards are going to be released when they're ready. That may mean that these cards go through some art changes, some mechanic changes, very likely some stat changes. So what I'm showing you is not necessarily 100% what's going to release. The cards could change dramatically before that. So instead I'm just going to look at them as is and sort of talk about, how they could change the meta when they come out, if they were to come out in their current form. And first off, I want to talk about the Heal spell. Okay, so Heal is kind of an interesting thing. This has been suggested forever, right? Like pretty much since the first early days of Clash Royale, it was like, oh, there should be a healing spell. And I'll admit that I was really against it for a long time. I'm still against the idea of tower damage being repairable. I don't think the tower should ever be able to be repaired or healed. But for a long time, I even said, no, there shouldn't be any heal spell. It would make beat down decks way too powerful. It would make a lot of these pushes that you have to answer with Fireball suddenly maybe not as answerable. But the longer the game has gone on, and I've seen how dominant damaging spells are in the game, how much you can just play like 3 damaging spells, and beatdown decks really can't get through consistently unless there's something like Golem Lightning or Lava Loon that's just so over the top as a beatdown deck that little like chippy defense doesn't work. And I'm coming around to the idea of having a healing spell in the game, and actually having played with it, it's really cool. It's kind of neat. Okay, so we'll talk about the specifics. First off, a 3 radius. That's pretty small. Let's look at Poison, which is probably the closest analog. Poison's a little bigger at a 3.5. 3 is the same size as like a freeze, I think. So think of a small, freeze-style radius, except it's going to heal at 176 damage per second at tournament cap. Now, to compare that to Poison, Poison does 75 damage a second. So each second of heal is like 2 seconds of poison damage reversed. This makes heal a great counter to poison if you have something like barbarians or mini tanks like a knight or ice wizard or musketeer that are walking through a poison. You can use heal to negate most of the effects of that poison. So poison's going to last 8 seconds and deal a total of 600 damage, but heal is only going to be 3 seconds, healing a total of 450 plus 75, 525 damage. So it's mostly going to reverse a poison for 1 less elixir. That's pretty cool, right? Like that seems effective. So what's worth mentioning is in the time, the way it does it very quickly over a 3-second period, this actually reverses tower damage effectively. Like, for each second that it's applying, it will heal more than the amount that you're taking from the tower. So not only will it prevent tower damage, but you will heal up any damage prior to that over a really quick period of time. There's a lot of interesting interactions I was thinking about with this card. For example, if they musketeer you by the tower, you can cast heal to largely reverse the damage of the fireball on your musketeer. You can use Hog Rider plus minions. And like if they zap, for example, you can heal up the zap damage on both your minions and the Hog Rider while reversing the tower damage that's being dealt to your Hog Rider. There's some really crazy stuff I think you could do where, for example, if you defend with a minion horde and it gets zapped, you can throw the miner in front of the minion horde, the tower starts shooting the miner, the minion horde catches up, and you cast heal on all of that to keep your miner tanking a little longer and recover all of the minion health. Why would that be needed? Well, maybe if there's like an Ice Spirit or something like that, or an Ice Golem around, you can use the heal to prevent the Ice Golem from killing the zapped minions. Barbs are the most natural fit, right? Like, Barbs are one of the few troops that have enough health to use the full amount of heal. Like, for example, a lot of troops have less than heal's full amount of health. Like, heal does, again, 525 health. There's a lot of things that have less than 525 health. Most mini tanks and then like musketeers, barbarians, those sort of things have more. So barbs seem like the most natural fit, but I guess I'm not really sure like in what position I would have like a giant with barbs behind it, and then I'd cast heal on all that. I mean, that's 13 elixir for a push that doesn't fight air at all, that still just like kind of gets wrecked by a minion horde. So I don't know, but like those are some ideas to think about. Elite barbs might be a really good idea, because so many times people use things like fireball and log to try to deal with elite barbs, and if you had a heal to put down in its place, you would largely reverse the fireball and let those elite barbs get to the tower and do a lot of damage. One really cool trick, and the timing on this is like impossible, but it's theoretically possible. Like, this will happen at some point. You throw a goblin barrel. You have a heal ready for where the goblin barrel is going to land, and yeah, it does hit all 3 goblins. Zap comes down, reduces the goblins to near dead. Before the tower shot goes off, the heal brings the goblins back up to full, and then the tower shoots, heal brings them back up to full, tower shoots, heal brings them back up to full. Like, there is a situation where you can buy a few extra goblin hits with heal on a goblin barrel, so that's really cool. Obviously, heal does not benefit cards like spear goblins, skeletons of all shapes and sizes, and then anything that would just straight up die to a spell, like fireball to archers, doesn't really benefit archers too much. I'm actually really excited about where this is going to bring the game, because right now the meta really encourages like spell bait stuff. There's a lot of big super duper tanks that are just so big they can usually survive through like Inferno towers, or just so tough that they can force a push through, or you have a lot of skeletons and goblins and really cheapy stuff. I'm actually really excited that heal is going to encourage cards like barbarians and cards like mini tanks, like the old trifecta decks and stuff would really benefit from this, because if you have a damaged Valkyrie, a damaged Hog Rider, and a damaged Musketeer all in a small area, and you cast heal on all 3 of them, you're getting a lot of value, because that's 12 elixir worth of troops that are getting refilled for only 3 elixir. The challenge with the card is it's really small. I mean, I really can't emphasize it. It's a pretty small radius, especially when you're used to things like poison and arrows, hitting a lot of troops all at once with a big radius. If things are moving around, or if you're trying to do a combination of melee and ranged troops, it's hard for all of them to be in a small area. And it's also going to be a card you build around, right? Like, you might naturally want to play things like archers, but heal in your deck is going to encourage you to play things like Mega Minion, Musketeer, things that are a little spell resistant but tend to take some damage. Because you're going to want people to bait their spells onto your somewhat resistant troops and then heal them. In a lot of ways, heal is sort of like a 3 elixir counter spell to those 4 elixir spells, in addition to all the great benefits it has at countering ranged troops. One last thought before I go is this is also really good for barbs, maybe against like Princess or Witch or something like that. It does splash damage, but at a very slow rate, not like a real high damage splash attacker, or like barbs in front of Executioner. It's kind of dumb to play barbs and then heal right after, but I'm just trying to think of a situation where there's a slow amount of DPS to a large group of things where heal could effectively reverse that. But I think the most common use of it will just be things like Miner with some damaged troops behind it, and you use the heal to make the Miner last longer while healing up the stuff that the Miner was tanking for, and that will sort of put what would just be a chip damage attack over the top into a tower taking push. Alright, enough jabber. Where would I put heal and ranking it for the 3 game modes? This one's actually hard, because when I evaluate cards, I tend to look for optimal situations, and heal is a card where like I can't figure out what the optimal situation is, but I know there's enough of them out there that it's going to be a good card. I would put this as, better than Rage, which isn't saying much, but I think this actually is like competitive with Freeze as well. It does a lot of the same stuff that Rage and Freeze does at a 3 cost and with some other side benefits. So like I see it kind of being competitive with those cards. So in Constructed, I'd probably put it as like middle of the pack. Like, it's a very situational card that hopefully enables new decks or cards that don't really see a lot of play right now to be a little better. But I think middle of the pack. I don't think it's like a meta shifter, but I hope it creates new fringe decks in the way that Clone kind of created some like clone decks that are out there, but I hope Heal's better than Clone. In 2-on-2, I think it's nuts. I think this is like, maybe that's why I'm so excited about it, because in 2-on-2, this thing has to be insane. Being able to counter poison for 2 players worth of troops is pretty crazy, and I think this is going to be one of the premier 2-on-2, not just cards, but like strategies, like double heal beatdown players. So I think this is the card built for clan battles. And for Draft Royale, hard to say. Like, in one case, it's good because you kind of can build around it. Like, any sort of build-around cards or cards that most people aren't going to want, but one person wants very badly, can tend to be very good cards, but it might not be a high draft pick. So I would put this probably somewhere kind of like Freeze, in like the 5th, 6th, 7th round. I don't think it'll ever go undrafted because it's better than Rage, and Rage usually gets picked. So I would put this, yeah, like 5, 6, 7 round, but there will be times where the player who gets it just, like, pulls off crazy games with it, because if you have a whole deck built around it and people don't have a lot of spells to use it on, you just get to use Heal as an amazing buff. And our next card is Bats. Bats. Bats are actually the easiest card to describe to you. They are flying skeletons. Exactly flying skeletons. The same hit points, the same damage. The only difference between bats and skeletons is bats fly very fast instead of skeletons fast. And despite what the text says, where it says 4 tiny flying creatures, the count is actually right. There are 5 bats in the swarm. So I've played with bats a bit now, and at first I didn't like them. When I first played them, I was like, this doesn't really make any sense to me. But the more I think about it, these cards will be good just by virtue of the things that they do. So let me talk about it this way. Any 1 and 2 cost card is going to be pretty decent, because there's going to be some deck out there that would rather play bats than maybe Ice Golem or Ice Spirit or Skeletons or what have you. And for those decks, they now have a cheap cycle card where maybe they were playing like minions in their place, and now they can reduce the cost by 1. Or they were playing Skeletons, but bats fits it a little better, and the deck becomes a little more potent. What I noticed, though, initially is they feel worse than... I'll start off with the bad first, because my first impression of them was bad, and then I grew to really understand how good they are. So I'll start off with the bad stuff first, and then we'll get to what I sort of discovered after playing them. My first impression was that they're worse than skeletons, because the thing that you often play skeletons for is a distraction troop towards heavy ground attackers. So like Prince Charges and Mini P.E.K.K.A.s, bats aren't really that good. Again, it doesn't stop a Prince Charge. Like, they don't kill the Prince before it hits the tower. So you play this, and you still end up taking the damage, and it doesn't feel very satisfying, because that's your main thing of blocking it for. However, they will still die to all the things that skeletons are afraid of, right? Trades evenly with Zap. Instead of being a -1 trade, it's just a 2 for 2 to kill bats with Zap. Princess Shots, Fire Spirits, Ice Wizards, those kind of cards are still really good against bats, while bats aren't good against things you might normally play skeletons for. The more I thought about it, though, there are some interesting tricks you can do with bats. So bats are the cheapest air unit in the game. There hasn't been persistent air units for 2 costs or less, which automatically make them the best counter to Bowler and Giant, really. Like, if you are going up against decks that are very log heavy, you can play like bats on top of a Bowler, and they can't log you. They might have to poison or fireball it or arrows it, but those are all negative elixir trades, so unless they have Zap in hand, it's not going to help them, and you expect that most people play log instead of Zap. So there's some... I like it as a card that's going to put pressure on log players and feel like, oh man, if I had Zap, I could deal with it, but if I have log, it's actually a pretty effective card I can't handle. Oops. It's the same as Mega Minion... I'm sorry, it's the same as Skeletons against Mega Minion, right? Like, you can use Skeletons just to distract Mega Minion for a few shots, but that's a 1 for 3 trade. Bats can do that as well, but it's a 2 for 3. So while it's not better than Skeletons, at least it's still a positive elixir trade against common cards. And I think they do the same with Minions, where not that they trade in open field, but on defense against enemy Minions, your tower plus the bats will take care of them. It's okay against Baby Dragon. I mean, obviously the splash isn't good, but they spread out a little bit, so it takes the Baby Dragon more than 1 shot. Helps. It would crush Inferno Dragon if Inferno Dragon was played that often, but I guess, if Inferno Dragon ever becomes good, if they ever buff it into being really strong, Bats sort of operates as a check on that card. Bats could also be, I think, a good like split push, for example, because think how cheap like an Ice Golem Bats push is. That's not a lot of elixir, but it's something they have to deal with, and they have to, like, even if they zap it, well, the Ice Golem will get a little bit of damage. If they deal with the Ice Golem, the Bats might, like, if they play Knight down, the Bat might kill the Knight. And even though that's a 3-for-4 trade, you cycled 2 cards and forced them to play something. Like, there's tricks there. Because it's a threat to the tower if it's tanked for, things like Minor Bats, kind of like Minor Goblin used to be good, is a threatening push that can't be logged away. If you're doing a Lava Hound deck, it's sort of like a poor man's minion horde, where it's obviously not as sturdy. It's like, it's vulnerable to zap, arrows, etc. But if they don't do anything, we all know how good skeletons are, right? Like, if skeletons are tanked for and not dealt with, they do a ton of damage, and these are skeletons that can't be damaged by any ground troops or spells. So what that actually means is hard to articulate. I've only been able to really play these cards against the trainer and in very limited friendly battles, so the kind of in-depth experimentation that'll happen when the card actually comes out, not quite there yet. But I'm seeing the upside of this card, right? It's really good with cheap pushes, just to summarize, really good with cheap pushes. Because it's the cheapest air unit ever, it becomes one of the best one-to-one trades against any ground troop. Giant, bowler, barbs, everything except for where you need a distraction troop. So, like, skeletons are better against Prince, but I would say Bats is probably better against everything else. Yeah, so that's my opinion on Bats. Where I would rank it, let's see, in one-on-one, I think it's medium strong. Like, I could be wrong and this end up being really strong, but I'm going to hedge my bets and say part of what makes skeletons really good is the blocking of the ground troops and the costing of 1. Costing 2 is obviously twice as much as 1, and if you're getting a card that's largely the same in most situations, I guess I'm a little leery of how good it could actually be, but I'm going to say, like, medium strong, top half of cards, but I'm not willing to put it up that high yet. 2-on-2, I think it's actually really good, because even if both players are playing Zap, this is a card that probably requires a Zap or a spell effect, and even if it gets killed, it's a cheap cycle card. I think this is probably actually really good in 2-on-2. And in Draft Royale, I'd put it mid to low round page. I think Skeletons, which normally go in like the 4th or 5th round. Actually, no, this might actually be a little higher, because air units are sort of at a premium, and it's going to be even harder to deal with Bats than it would be normally. That I might put this as like a 3rd or 4th round pick. I might put it like a round or 2 before Skeletons. So I think this is probably slightly better than Skeletons in Draft Royale. Situationally better, but probably overall not as impressive in 1-on-1. And I think this might just be like really good in 2-on-2 as a card you can double up on. Like, you could play Skeletons and Bats in a 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 deck, and I think both would actually be... If you're trying to cycle Elixir Collectors and you want a bunch of Swarm troops, could be cool. And the third of the new troops is the Night Witch. Night Witch. This one's actually a little oddball. So she is a witch, costs 4, similar hit points to a witch, kind of similar hit points to a bandit. Actually, I think her and bandit might have the exact same hit points. Yeah, so her and bandit have the same hit points, which is a little more than the Mega Minion. So 4 cost, doesn't die to fireball or poison. She summons bats every 5 seconds, which, to compare to a witch summons 3 skeletons every 7.5 seconds. So that's 3 skeletons every 7.5 seconds is 6 skeletons every 15 seconds. The Night Witch summons 2 bats every 5 seconds. So it's still 6 bats every 15 seconds. So it's the same amount of summons per time, except that bats are worth more than skeletons, ostensibly, right? Like 2 cost bats compared to 1 cost skeletons. So, but she's only summoning 2 instead of 2 out of 5 instead of 3 out of 4, so maybe it's not the exact same value. But either way, she summons them every 5 seconds, 2 at a time. The weird thing about her, though, is that she's a melee troop. She's got a staff, and she's actually kind of got a longer range staff. She's like a prince, where it's like a 2-tile pokey staff. My first impression with Night Witch is like super awkward. I actually don't like her, and I've been trying to play her. I probably played her more than any of the other new troops to try to figure it out because I like the normal witch a lot. So I had kind of high hopes that this card could be cool. But I'm at least glad they're waiting a bit to keep testing and releasing this one because it feels really weak, but not just like underpowered weak with the stats, but awkward, like hard to handle and hard to understand what the Night Witch is actually supposed to do. So here's my impression of her is that she's a support card through and through. Like, absolutely needs to be tanked for, but so much of a support troop that I can't actually figure out what she trades with well. So, because she has a melee range of 2, but the bats have a melee range of 1, so they fly a little ahead of her. Like, even if they're fighting a tower, the bats will be a little closer to the tower than she will. She's not even a good tank for the bats because the towers never lock onto her. The bats, like, summon, fly very fast, and go ahead. And even when she gets up to the tower won't attack her. The bats attack. Now, she has a little trade-off. When she dies, she summons 4 bats. So there's some cool tricks, right? So she's a witch for 4 that has a tombstone effect. When she dies, 4 bats come out. So, theoretically, if she tanked for the bats, she would be kind of like a lava hound, where, you know, she's walking up all melee style, not very strong, but when she dies, she makes bats. She makes a bat the whole time. So she's tanking, bats come up, swarm the tower, kill her, more bats come out, lava pups take over the tower, and that's cool, right? I get that. But instead what happens is you summon her, the bats fly ahead, because they're skeletons, they get shot one at a time, so bat dead, bat dead. Then it locks onto the Night Witch. She dies like halfway to the tower because she doesn't have that much health. Bats come out and they just go get shot down. Like, you know, it feels weird. So playing her by a tower, playing her against a tower one-on-one doesn't work. It's kind of awkward. She's melee, but her bats are flying, and kind of like we talked about with bats, they don't really distract the stuff in front of her. So she's fragile in a melee troop, but she can't actually have anything to hold the line for like Witch does. So what happens is even cards like Knight or Mini P.E.K.K.A. or whatever, Valkyrie, like kill the Night Witch and summon a bunch of bats. So what ends up happening is like you cast Night Witch, or they cast Night at the river and you cast Night Witch in response. The Knight kills the Night Witch and summons the total of, 6, 8, whatever bats that are now out. But again, that's just like 8 skeletons, so the tower just mostly picks them off and maybe takes a little bit of damage. So it's like a -1 elixir trade that doesn't really threaten a tower without support. So, okay. Now, if she fought well on defense, then it would make sense that like she fights on defense, and then you play the miner on the counterattack. The miner tanks for her and the bats, and then if she does get killed by a spell, it's just more bats. So they fireball or lightning her or something, more bats come out, and it's not a total loss of value like it is with the normal witch, but I can't emphasize that I literally don't know what she trades with. Because even against things like Musketeer, again, so you play Musketeer, you play the whatever around, like, because she's so fragile, I guess she kills the Musketeer and barely survives, but if you play him at a distance, it's not close. Like, the Musketeer just shoots the bats, then starts shooting her, and then by the time she gets, like, I guess they trade, but again, it's a 4-for-4 trade that leaves you with, like, 3-4 bats, which I don't know if that, even an even elixir trade, is particularly valuable compared to all the other things you can be doing on defense. Like, there's a lot of situations where you can defend a Musketeer either for way less elixir or for equal to more elixir, but with a better surviving counterattack troop, and she just doesn't feel that good on defense. Cool thematic note is I guess bats are part of the game now, right? Like, we have bats as a standalone card, and we have bats as a spawn out of Night Witch, which makes there's as many bat cards now as there are minion cards, right? Like, I guess, unless you want to count Mega Minion, right? But there's Minion Horde, Minions, and Mega Minion, and Minions are like, part of the lore, part of the theme. We'd all expect to see a Minion spawner or more cards, like a Minion pack leader or something. Like, Minions are part of the lore. So I assume that from now on, bats will be a part of the lore because there are 2 bat cards in the game, which is as much as most other, sort of themes and flavors in Clash Royale. Any final thoughts on Night Witch? I'm not even going to lie to you. I've tried her with Ice Golem. I've tried her with Knight. I've tried her with Miners, like a counterattack thing. She just feels really awkward. Like, she feels worse than Witch. And, like, every time I play her, I almost feel like I would rather spend the 1 extra elixir on Witch, because at least I can rely on Witch on defense to, like, stop ground distraction troops, or like barbs or something, or at least kill minion hordes, or it's like I don't know what I would literally play against. Like what comes at you where you would want to play a fragile melee attacker that has flying skeletons in front of it? Because even if it was something like Inferno Dragon, where bats would be really good, Night Witch only has 2 bats, and she doesn't attack the air, so even against Inferno Dragon, the Inferno Dragon just kills the bats and then, like, locks onto her, or so, I don't know, right? Like, so maybe she's really good against, like, I don't know, Bandit? But again, I think Bandit would kill her and just leave behind a bunch of bats, so do you want to take a -1 elixir trade to get a swarm of bats? I guess, maybe. So yeah, like I said earlier, I tend to look for optimal situations, and that's sort of how I judge a card. Like, what is the best case scenario? And if it has a good best case scenario, then we can work on trying to make that scenario occur more often. But with Night Witch, I'm struggling to even figure out what the optimal scenario is. The best thing I can think of is that it's probably better than Witch at dealing with an Inferno Tower. Right, because the minions fly, and the bats fly, but they're very fast instead of skeletons fast, so they should be able to not just be in the air, but get ahead of the giant pretty quickly and intercept the Inferno Tower. So that's like the one situation I can see it being better, but at the same time, you can lightning or zap, or normal witch is still good, or minions, or like, there's just like a lot of other cards I would still rather play than Night Witch, even in that optimal situation I can think of. So yeah, I mean, that's probably why I'm so down on her, so I hope she gets a change. I think what she could use is either just make her like a ranged attacker, make her like, instead of melee, make her like a 3-range attacker, like the Baby Dragon used to be, just kind of like a shorter range one or something, but melee doesn't work. Or give her a shield or something. Like, if she had a shield, like a bone shield maybe, so she couldn't be lightninged, and thus was a little more tough to deal with, I don't know. She needs some work, though. So in terms of ranking her, as is right now, and again, this can all change, right? Like, I hope that of all these 3 new cards, Night Witch is the one that gets a little bit of a bufferino before they release her. Because if I had to do like an Electro Wizard challenge where everyone had to play Night Witch, it would be sad. I would put her as probably one of the 10 worst troops in the game. Not kidding, like real bad, like down there with. It's sad because she's unique. She does a lot of cool stuff, but right now I'd put her like bottom 10 troops for 1-on-1. Might be a little better in 2-on-2 simply because of the death rattle effect. Like the fact that she dies and then turns into more stuff is potentially useful because of all the spells. Like she can eat a lightning shot, turn into bats. It's not the worst thing. But because poison and arrows and zap and stuff are so prominent, sometimes both players have zap, I don't know how much even like turning into a swarm of bats, how good that really is with princesses and zaps and stuff around. So I'd probably put her a little better in 2-on-2, but probably still not playable. Like you probably just wouldn't be building around her at all. And in Draft Royale, I mean, I could legit see her going undrafted. That's how bad my first impressions of this legendary is. I'm not even kidding, because like I can't imagine when I would want this card and what it would go for. Because even think of like in situations where you're super tanked for, like hiding behind a giant. She's not that fast moving. She doesn't do that much damage. Like 190 DPS is not bad at all, but it's about the same as a musketeer. So it's just not like she does mini P.E.K.K.A damage when she gets up there. You know, she's doing just a normal amount of damage, and she moves not that fast. So I'd rather have a lumberjack behind, or a mini P.E.K.K.A or something, maybe even a musketeer, because at least the musketeer stands at range. You know, so it's a little hard for me to see when she'd use it. I'd say she's probably like a bottom 2-round Draft Royale pick, although she'd be picked higher than that at first just for people wanting to try her out. But I think normal Witch is better in Draft Royale than Night Witch. Alright guys, well that's my first impressions of these 3 cards. I'm sorry I couldn't show you any gameplay, but them's the breaks. So I try to describe them as best as I can, give you as much information as possible. Remember, these cards are going to be released whenever they're ready, so there's no guaranteed release date in any of these cards, and I would bet that they see some significant changes or tweaks before they come out. So thanks for watching. This is yet another sneak peek on this very busy weekend. I'm just recording video after video. If you'd like to see the rest of the sneak peeks, and again, there's still some doozies coming, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next Clash Royale sneak peek video.